Alright, what's up guys, it's Blue TTCG back with another Vanguard deck profile, this time for Granblue Premium. And today's deck profile is going to be presented by one of my friends. He's going to show his deck, and I'll leave it to him to take it away.
Alright, so today I'm going to be showcasing my Nightrose Beatrice deck. I really like Nightrose, I always have, and I guess we'll just get into it. Our starters, of course, Captain Nightkid, the V starter, just because the drawing is just amazing. The quick shield's also pretty helpful. There is another starter that you could do, which is Grenache, but I do believe that he's just better in the deck, like most people run him in Granblue. So although he is a great zero in deck, because he can countercharge, he's just useful. I'll explain that later. Granblue is a Protect land, and you can choose between Protect 1 and Protect 2. I have seen people use Protect 2 for Granblue, but I really think that's not the way to go, because most of your columns are going to be hitting very, very large numbers without the 5k. That losing a Sentinel in hand is just not worth it. So if you ever want to try it, I don't recommend it, but you can test it out for yourself. Alright, we'll start by going over the triggers. So first off, I run 2 of the draw add to soul plus 10k crit, and then 4 of the add to soul for drawing. Arguably this card is better, however, because I do not have 2 more of this card, I don't run it at 4. The disadvantage of running this crit at 4 is that it's only a 5k base crit, so your attacks do hit for less, and it is a 1k shield. However, it's still useful just because since you are using Beatrice a lot to recall from grave, you do want to keep stacking your soul. Although you keep rewriting, it is a bit harder, and having the crits to go into soul, especially this one, is very helpful, especially when you're going for your main combo through Bad Bounty. We also run a few more crits, but these are just stride fodder crits because they're very important, especially in premium. It's Chad the Ghostie. He is in fact Chad. Just a good crit to have, especially for discarding cost. However, in this deck, you do benefit a lot from discarding your grade 3s just because you can recur them, especially with Skull Dragon. Discarding Skull Dragon for cost is always a big bonus for you, whether it's through striding, whether it's through Dolph the Ghostie, or just any discard cost. So, not as important, but useful when it does come up, just because it is 1 card discard to stride. Of course, we also have the new heals that came out a while ago. Very useful. They're great, especially since you can add them off of your searchers, and you can actually recur them with the cool Greed Shade combo, which is fairly knowledgeable news, but I'll show it off anyway, just for people that don't know. But it's very useful. The -2 crit is especially good, especially when facing like Nightmare Dolls or Regalia when you're still in grade 2. It's just solid. Not much more to say about that. You could opt out for playing the normal Guardians. In that case, depending on your build, whether you're more Beatrice focused or Nightrose focused, you would alternate between having the Ghostie heals or just standard heals. And next, the last 2 triggers are 1 stand and the over trigger. The stand, a lot of people have seen been cutting the stand out from the deck. I still think it's pretty useful just because you can mill it off of one of your G units, one of the Ghosties, which I'll go into later. So it can get another revive if you ever want to do that tactic. It's just helpful. Additionally, it's just an extra 10k, shuffles back. Like, it's just a solid, but only on a 1-off. I don't see it ever being more than that. And if you ever want to cut to play around with the trigger lineup, you can definitely cut this card off. Then the over trigger is just amazing. It's the all-in-one. It can net you a card, so it draws, gives everything 10k, the front row 10k. It heals, it gives a crit, it just does everything. Really, I think the most busted over trigger in the game, so why not run it? The crit element might be tempting just to boost your Skull Dragons, but in the long run, this is a lot more effective, just in general. Although I often mill this, and I don't actually call it as a trigger. So yeah, that's mostly trigger lineup. Pretty clear cut, as you can tell. We do run a lot of crits in the deck, with everything being mostly a crit except for the stands and the heals. As you can tell, I did not run the draw sentinels, simply because our draw sentinel that's a grade 1 is a lot more helpful for the deck, which I'll go into right now. So, as I was saying, the Sentinel is Dolph. He's just amazing. The reason why Dolph is great is because if you end up writing him as your grade 1, it's a free card advantage usually. Most games you will have something in your hand that you do want to end up in your drop zone, and since you are playing Granblue, you do have a lot of good recursion from the drop zone. So most of the time when I do write Dolph, I usually have a Skull Dread that I'm just going to discard to drop, which is where Skull Dread likes to be, if not on the Rearguard Circle. Additionally, because he is a grade 1, like he's just useful with using with Negronora, because Negronora can call from drop to Guardian Circle, 2 different cards with 2 different grades, so it's just very useful to have him and maybe another card that you might need in case you have something like Die Kaiser, the D-Police that can burn you even though you have Sentinels. So it's just very useful, very good. I've seen people try to cut him and use different Guardians, Sentinels. I do see the benefit in running the countercharger Sentinel. It's also very helpful, very useful. However, I do run a different card that countercharges, which I think is just slightly better. But you have flexibility in this spot. It's just that if you do run the other Sentinel, it is a lower base, so a lot of things will hit you more. But then again, you do want counterblast, so you're at liberty to choose with how you feel in this spot. But I do think Dolph nets you a lot of advantage.
I think the countercharge PG also does not work when placed from anywhere. I think only from hand.
I'm not 100% sure, but I do know that it does have a few restrictions to it, so it's ultimately open to the person. The card I run for countercharging as a grade 1 though is Dancing Cutlass, one of my favorite cards from V. The effect is real simple. If it's in drop, bind another copy of this card, and then you are able to call it to Rearguard Circle, and then, middle card afterwards, call a Rearguard Circle, and then countercharge. It's really useful. You could actually cycle this and go through this multiple times, not just 2 times because you have 2 cutlasses. The only issue is that since you, well, not even an issue, it's a benefit. Since you are milling a card, it does fill your drop, which is what you want for big Skull Dread numbers. However, I have a bad luck with this card in that it always mills my Overtrigger. That is purely RNG, so I don't think that's a detriment to the card. I think it's very good. I do see people occasionally run the old Dancing Cutlass to Soul Blast 2 to draw. I don't think it's bad, but the reason why I don't play the Banshee card, that's also Soul Blast 1 to draw card when placed from drop to Vanguard, is just because your soul is so precious because you are playing Beatrice that a lot of times you want to conserve it, and you running cards that Soul Blast 2, even though it gives you a card, can be a bit tight when you're starting to go into more of your combos of Beatrice or defensive plays with Beatrice, which this deck loves to do. Now we're going to go more into like 1-ofs with the grade 1s, or 2-ofs, just because numbers are a bit funky with Granblue. So I do play 2 of the Ghostie brothers, and at the moment, 2 Rollocks. The Ghostie brothers are just really good just to be able to search. And once again, when you discard a card from hand, it's never really a cost because usually you're discarding something that you want in drop that you can resurrect later through other card effects, or you're just milling because you have to in the case of Skull Dragon, which needs to be in the drop to really facilitate any plays with him since he cannot be called normally. Same goes for Ghost Ship if you decide to play Ghost Ship. My particular build does not play him. If you do end up playing Ghost Ship, I do recommend only playing him at 1, not more, simply because he's not as advantageous as a Skull Dead Dragon. The Rollock are mostly just a cool tech card to have against a lot of grade 2 rushes, since a lot of clans nowadays have been having really good grade 2 games, especially Nightmare Dolls, although I don't see him as much. However, they're still a menace, so I still keep this card. A different card you can play instead of this, which is really good, which I don't play, is Negro Bone. Negro Bone is an excellent card, however, it's never really come up for me in any fashion. I see people play him at 4. I don't think that's correct, just because sure you'll get him off, but playing 4 copies is just more space taken out of the deck that you can put for other cards, which is just a lot more useful. So if you ever do decide to play Negro Bone, which is a good card, definitely a 1 or 2 of, and you replace these 2 cards for. But then again, these are dependent on what you're facing in the meta, so the rocks can always leave if need be. Next, I also play Honoly. Ursula, and Belle. The reason why I play these cards, well, Honoly is mostly just for control, because with Granblue you're able to actually call her during your opponent's turn. So if you count the number of attacks and you see they're going to push for more, you can definitely go into Negro Lily, Beatrice into Honoly, and either put a stop to their attacks or make them double think about how they're going to manage the resources. So it's very crucial to have, very helpful. Really opens up lines of protection, lines of defense, which I think is just amazing. You don't want to run more than one of her, just because you can't search her off and you can't call her pretty easily. These two cards are from Overdress, and Overdress have brought a lot of cool cards that can definitely have a lot of use and a good space in the deck. There are more cards, of course. A lot of people have been experimenting with Overdress cards. Bermuda Triangle has. Mega Colony just loves Overdress, so definitely suggest checking them out. In particular, I love Belle because she's able to recur the Cutlasses, because she's able to, when called on Rearguard Circle, return all cards that are bound back to the drop zone, and then she gains 5k. So it's really good. Let's say you use 2 Cutlasses, right, and then like you really want to countercharge, you can easily use her effect to return the 2 cards that were bound back to the drop, give her 10k, and you can use them again. So it's just really good recursion within the deck, but also it's really good for the matchup against Narukami, which is actually prevalent, just because you can constantly return cards that are bound, which stops their plays, stops their advantage over you because they think they have the upper hand by like binding your cards because you want them to drop, but that's why we run Belle. The only thing is, if you are facing the Narukami matchup with Belle, the faster you get her out, the better, just because you're giving them less advantage, less stuff that is bound, so less effects will go off for them. Additionally, just make sure that if you do that, you always call over her to make sure she's in drop. Just because you didn't drop her hand, but there's no real good way to get her into hand once she's on the field / drop. Just because they can bind from field, and if they do, they get to choose, and they can bind from hand as well. But anything they bind from drop, it's up to you to choose. So you can easily choose everything else except her, and then find a way to call her out, then return everything back. So just be careful with her, because she is your lifeline and your saving grace against Narukami. And then she's just really good for resist plays. So if you're facing Kagero, which likes to denial Griffin, or if you're having a mirror match with another Granblue player, she gives whatever's in front of her resist. So it's really good to protecting your Skull Dreads before they attack. And additionally, she also allows you to swap units between between rows, not just columns. So it's just very useful. She doesn't come up often, but she is helpful. Next we go into grade 2s. Well, actually, Grenache. So, like I was saying earlier, we do play Grenache in the deck, not as our starting Vanguard, but just as a utility card. Being able to countercharge 2 is very helpful, very useful for the deck, just because you are a tad counterblast heavy, but having him around is just very helpful, because you can even call him, hollow him, and then at the end of the turn just allow him to retire, and then just free countercharge. So really good, especially in early game, because you need 2 counterblasts to really do anything, but you also want to have 2 counterblasts for your opponent's turn to do any Negro Lily plays. So next is the grade 2s. So I play 3 of Colombard, and then 3 of Grenache, along with a few other cards, but I'll go over these first. So I've seen people cut them down from 4 to 3, which is what I've done, and then from 3 to 2. Definitely, if that's what you want to do, go for it, just because it does help with what you put instead, which I'll explain in a bit. But I definitely do like having them at 3 and 3, just because I often want to open up with Colombard to have him as my grade 2 ride, and then Colombard into Grenache discard, and then usually add something off of his discard. Something good. Could be Nightrose, could be a bunch of different things. It just depends, but this does open up decent plays and tries to fix some hands, depending on what you do have in hand and what you have milled or have in drop zone. So I definitely think if you want to cut a card, definitely go with Colombard first and keep Grenache at 3, because Grenache does allow you to add Heal Guardians back if need be, add Sentinels back if need be, fix your ride by adding a Nightrose or even Night Mist, Night Storm. Grenache is just very useful in the deck. It also mills cards, so it's just provides a lot for the deck. Colombard's just good for the writing. And then the next 2 cards we only run 8 grade 2s, is Eleanor and, of course, Skeleton Cannoneer. The reason I run Skeleton Cannoneer is for our Denial of Griffin play, where we use Negroli, which is a G Guardian, to call Beatrice to then call Cannoneer, Hollow Cannoneer, activate Cannoneer's effect, pops, retire something on the opponent's field, usually a really tanky rear guard that's going to hit you pretty hard, get rid of it, and at the end of the turn you draw a card off of him. She's just good to be able to ride as another ride target, just because in this deck, ultimately, you only have her and Colombard that you want to ride into. Her just with a 10k base, harder to beat over, harder to work with. Additionally, she's able to revive something off the drop zone, so if you have to call her to rear guard, she's actually pretty useful. If you do want to cut Colombard or Greed Shade, I would suggest playing more of her or overdress cards, just because they are a 10k base, so they do provide some advantage over grade 2 rushes and grade 2 decks, or decks that like to rush on grade 2. Being a 10k base, pulling 1 trigger really stops some of their plays, some of their plans, and just halts them where they're at. So I definitely recommend, if you're gonna cut for this card or overdress cards, just for the 10k base. And next we go into the grade 3s. We'll go into the utility cards first, which is going to be Night Mist and Night Storm. Night Mist is mostly for your multi-attacks with Skull Dragon. You will never ever use his Vanguard ability. It was pretty cool, pretty useful back in the day, but the main use is that on rear guard, you can hollow him, and then at the end of the battle that attacks a Vanguard, you're able to counterblast and then summon back, call back a unit from your drop. It doesn't have to be Skull Dragon. Of course, it's dependent on a bunch of different things, but most of the time when you're trying to push for game, trying to be aggressive, you will use his effect for Skull Dragon specifically. So it's just useful for that. There are ways to get him back, so even if you usually want to mill him just to get him back, like either Greed Shade or just Beatrice reviving him back. So he's usually one of the things you mill. And then the other card we have is Night Mist. He's just an enabler for the multi-attack. So what he does is, Limit Break 4, when a Granblue unit rides on top of him, you're able to revive 2 units from your drop and then give him 5k. So it's very useful just because it does allow the multi-attack chains, which I'll go briefly over. But you just have to be cautious that heal triggers will actually be the bane of your existence if you're trying to go into your big play and then you heal, or if you plan to go for the push and you heal. So just be cautious when using him, when going into him, just because it's either you're incredibly aggressive and you usually win, or you heal and he becomes a dead target, which I'll explain a bit later. But he is very useful, he is very helpful, but only on a one-off. Next is the best card in the deck, the Skull Dragons. Skull Dragons cannot be called from hand. They retire at the end of the battle they attack, but what makes them so good is that they gain 2k for every card in the drop. So once you reach the middle of the game, especially late game, they are incredibly intimidating. And although they only hit for 1 damage, we play a lot of crits, so easily giving them the crit makes them things that your opponent just can't let them go through. So it's literally Sentinel or die most of the time when you have Skull Dragons out. They're very good. You could play a third, but I would only recommend playing a third if you plan to go into a Zeroth Dragon a lot, which I'll show you in a bit. Just because with Zeroth Dragon, you're able to swap between zones, which means that having a third enables a third attack from a Skull Dragon. However, most of the time, you only ever need 2, sometimes only even 1. However, we do run 2 because of Zeroth play still enables you to get a lot of advantage from 2. And in case one goes into damage, you still have a second end drop to get advantage from. So, it's Skull Dragons, best card in the deck. Next, we run the best girl, which is Nightrose. and then her supporting first mate, Beatrice. The thing with Nightrose, why I run her at 4 instead of having Beatrice at 4 and Nightrose at lesser numbers, is that she has an amazing push during like when you're going first and you're at grade 3 and you're grade 2, just because of her 5k to everything around her. Even though they do retire after the battle, after they boost, it's just really good to have really solid numbers. Additionally, her being able to counterblast, to revive a column, or even just revive one unit in case you are going first, it's just really helpful. Or still revives the column, just doesn't get a 10k if you're going first. It's just very useful, really good, really aggressive, definitely really strong. And I think it's just good when you're trying to push for damage, trying to be that like aggressive play. Additionally, having 4 is really consistent since we do want to get the Night Mist combo out a lot faster, a lot more frequent. Beatrice is really good if you're running her at 4 for control, but since I'm trying to be a bit more aggro with the deck, Nightrose is our key Vanguard, the person we want to ride into. Beatrice is still good though. It's just that you use her more as the utility piece that she is, because whenever she's called, Soul Blast 1, and then call something back from drop. So it could be anything. So this can either be your Skull Dragons for damage. It could be your Honoly for defensive plays, your Cannoneer for retire plays. It really opens up the toolkit that is Granblue. So she is definitely a must-have in any Granblue deck. Ratios definitely vary, but I don't think you should run her at less than 2, just in case one does get bound, one gets into damage, and what have you. But she is extremely helpful. If you do plan to play control variant, running more Ghosties could be helpful, although a pure Ghostie deck is more of a meme. However, she is very helpful with the Ghosties because she does give them intercept, she does give them 5k power and 5k shield. But pure Ghosties with Beatrice is a meme, so only do that if you really like Ghosties. So that constitutes most of the main deck. For grade 3s, we run a pretty hefty number. We run 10, not too much, but definitely higher than our grade 2s, just because our grade 3s is where we get most of our value from. So you do want to see them in drop, you do want to see them in hand. So yeah. And then for the G deck. For our G deck, we're running 2 of Big Obadiah, which is the painful choice of the deck. It is, outside of Cardfight, it is arguably a very broken card. Within Cardfight, because it is selective to the clan, it's very helpful. What he does is, after it's an act ability, you can counterblast 1, flip a card face up from your G zone, and then you get to search your deck for up to 5 cards and send them to drop. And then afterwards, you get to revive units up to the number of face up cards in your G zone to the field and give them all 5k. So early game, this is always your first stride unless you don't have counterblast, just because he will give you the toolkit that you need. He will mill that Honoly, he will mill that Beatrice, he will mill Nightrose if you want to fix your awkward ride. Maybe you rolled Skull Dragon, maybe you rolled a heal trigger for whatever reason. He'll fix your rides, he'll help you fix your rides. Like, he does so much for the deck, and you definitely want to ride him first. However, we do run 2 because you might want to mill more. You want to get your Skull Dragons higher in power. But the main reason I run 2 is because 1 for early game and then 1 for late game. Often, for me personally, I don't like to call from hand as much because I want my hand as a toolkit against my opponent. I want my hand to be like where I have the majority of my defenses, and then my drop zone where I have most of my offense, where I have most of my toolkit. So I will use the second Ghostie, if at all, when trying to revive the whole field to push for a more offensive turn, but not trying to commit too many resources to do so. So, because usually when you go into him during, like, let's say your 3rd stride, or even your 2nd stride, depending how you played your 1st stride and your falling turn, you can revive the whole field for just 1 counterblast, which is just amazing value. And then the next card we play is the Nightrose stride. I have never really gone into her unless I want to be funny. She can be useful by getting a crit and does revive a unit, I believe. But the thing with her is that she just doesn't do much for the deck, and that's the sad thing. the main reason people run her, if at all, is to flip for Obadiah, which is the sad thing. You could, of course, play more Obadiahs, but you see, I really like Nightrose, so I run 2 Nightrose. The next card is one of the best cards ever printed for Granblue, which is Bad Bounty. Bad Bounty is... it's just really good. He allows you to go for more attacks because at the end that he attacks, he Counterblast and discard 3 cards, which it's really helpful that it's at the end of the battle that he attacks, because depending on what you drive check, you can even discard what you drove check. So it's just a lot more useful that way, and a lot really helpful. Really changes how the card performs. But you play the cost, and then you're able to look at your drop zone. Put him back to G zone. Look at your drop zone. Write a card from drop zone as stand on your Vanguard, and that just enables multi-attacking. That just enables a whole lot. Bad Bounty plus 4 damage, plus Nightrose and Night Storm just enables you to go for a 9 attack combo. So it's just really helpful, really good. You don't necessarily have to go for this either. Bad Bounty by himself with a Nightrose is really helpful because you could have a field attack with, let's say, Skull Dragon, another grade 2 or grade 3. Skull Dragon dies. Activate Bad Bounty, you got 3 attacks. Call a Nightrose on another Nightrose or Beatrice or whatever you have on your Vanguard circle. Make her attack, activate her effect, revive a column, then like keep going. Of course, if you rode Night Mist, and then you rode Nightrose on top of him after using Bad Bounty, that just opens up even more attacks. So it's just extremely helpful and definitely what enables the deck to go into its multi-attack chains and really push for game. So very, very good card.
I'm gonna go for the long bond, right? And you see that red and yellow? That's ketchup and
Another card I play is also Normal Obadiah. Normal Obadiah is not as good as Big Obadiah, of course. It is helpful though, just in the case that your first stride turn you don't have any counterblast because he has an on place no 3, and then he revives a Ghostie. It's not that great, it's not that good, but we do run it as a 1-of in case we do get damage denied, just because we want that option. We still want to mill from our deck, even if it's not the most optimal thing to do. It is free too, so you're not wasting resources, so at least there's that. Next, I still run Breeze. This could be cut for anything you want. It's just there as filler at this point, but it is helpful in case it was helpful. We also run the Progenitor Dragon, and of course the Xerath Dragon. I end up going more into the Progenitor Dragon, if at all, just because the free stride is very helpful with the deck. Although striding is actually beneficial too. It just depends what stage in the game you are, what you're facing. But he is good for pushing for damage, just because whenever a Guardian is placed, you can discard a card to retire it. You can't cheat out Sentinels because it's an on-place effect and they could still activate their auto abilities to protect the Vanguard. But you can still retire G Guardians, you can still retire like really high massive guard. You can even retire an over-trigger decide to guard with that. Like it opens up good pressure, and if nothing else, it starts to rip cards from the opponent if they decide to start guarding. So it's very helpful. The Xerath Dragon, Megiddo, he's a good tool. Most of the time, I prefer the finisher of going into Night Mist, Nightrose after Bad Bounty, just because it provides you a lot more pressure and without the high of a cost. The Xerath Dragon is great, but the thing is, you do rely on your G deck a lot, so after him, it's either kill or die yourself, which is just the sad truth with him in most decks I think that he's in. Most Xerath Dragons. Next we play 2 Neganoras. Neganora is really good just to be able to Soul Blast and call from drop 2 Guardian Circle. You can get free Sentinels through this. Of course you have to discard, but you can get like just high massive shield values. Let's say you end up milling the over trigger, which happens more times than I would like. You do have a free 50k whenever you do call her, which is just very useful, very helpful. Often enough, you go into Negro Lily more, but Negranora is still really, really solid and an amazing card to go into, just to like circumvent things like Basiel or Hamiel is just really, really good. I know that's mostly Angel Feather, but that's what I face most of the time. So, yeah. And then I run 3 Negro Lilies. One of these could be one of the Cray Elemental G Guards or other G Guards. I don't really think, I think Cray Elemental G Guards. I don't think there's other G Guards within Granblue that you would want to run necessarily. Negro Lily opens up the majority of your plays. She is a toolkit within herself due to the creation of Beatrice. Because with Negro Lily, you counterblast 1 when she's placed, call a Ghostie, she gets 1,000 shield, and then if you call out Beatrice, which is mostly your main target, you get to call anything depending on what you need. Maybe you call Grenache because you want to be able to countercharge to do something later. Maybe off Beatrice you go for a Greed Shade to get your heal guardian back. I mean, not your heal guardian, your heal back to then G-Guard again. Maybe you go into him so you can set up your combo to get maybe Nightrose back, or you go into Night Mist back. So like Greed Shade opens up a lot of opportunities just off Greed Shade opens up a lot of opportunities off of Beatrice, which came off of Negro Lily, all during your opponent's turn. Of course, there's also the main defensive plays that this deck loves, which is the whole like Honoly play. So you could go like Lily, Beatrice, Honoly, and this is just really helpful. Of course, try to circumvent Honoly's counterblast effect by like wasting your counterblast beforehand. Then there's always, of course, the Nile Griffin play with Cannoneer, and that's just all off really Lily and a Beatrice. Of course, you have to have your drop zone set up to have these type of plays, these types of interactions, but she is just extremely helpful, extremely good. I know a lot of people just use her for the Nile Griffin, but she opens up a lot. And I wouldn't suggest running her at 4 just because you cannot afford it. Like, you'll never go into 4. Maybe cut her down to 2, of course, and run the Cray Elemental. But I don't think you should ever run her less than 2. She is too invaluable for the deck. And then the last G-Guardian we play is one of Deep Corpse Dragon. He rarely comes up, but he is pretty nice to be able to mill more cards off the top of your deck, just to be able to get your Skull Dragons at a big enough number. Most of the time, though, if you're balancing out your deck, you usually have Greed Shade pop off his effect a few times, so your drop will be pretty heavy, and your skulls will be hitting pretty hard without going into him. But he is nice utility to have in case you need it. Additionally, since we're playing Dancing Cutlass, we are having 1 card mills a lot, so we do mill more than you might expect. Of course, we don't place things like Skull Navigator, which just mills cards from the top of your deck by resting units. He's good in V. In Premium, I think it's just too much, and it's just not worth it because we're not trying to turbo the grave. We're trying to play more of a control game. Well, depending on matchup, we're trying to play an aggressive game depending on what we're playing. Like Amber Dolls, we're trying to want to push, but after our initial pushes, we do want to have a sense of control over the state of the game. Not a great deal of it, simply because we are using Nightrose, but we do want to be playing our game and not letting the opponent play their game. So, yeah. That's mostly it when it comes to the profile. Of course, there's different combos, but I kind of outline them. Most of the time, like, Beatrice is just like, Beatrice, that's not Rose. Beatrice is just very, very helpful for opening everything up. You really want her in grave off of Big Obadiah. So optimally off Big Obadiah, for example, you want to make sure that you mill off Beatrice, Nightrose, Cannoneer, Honoly, Grenache. These are like the main things you do want to mill off of them. Of course, Skull Dragon, but it's just dependent on what you have milled off already and what you have in your hand and what you don't have in hand. But you definitely have targets to mill. It just depends on the game state, but these are definitely your priorities when you are milling, I would think. So that's just a little something to think about. Additionally, a lot of times be wary about pushing too much because the deck does face a lot of issues with decking out. If you have Negrabone, that could solve it, but the issue with Negrabone too is that you're losing hand presence. So it just depends how you want to play your game with cards in hand and cards in drop. So, yeah.
All right, awesome. Thanks so much to Adrian who presented his Granblue deck profile for Premium. I hope you guys appreciated all the tech options that he's considered for this deck, and it really helps to have all the flexibility because this deck, I think, is one of the most versatile decks available right now in Premium. So take some notes, guys. All right, if you enjoyed this video, please feel free to leave a like and a comment, and please subscribe as well. It really helps the channel out, and I hope to see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.
11